Hello, I'm John Weingart with the Eagleton Institute of Politics. On January 30th, 2013, Jeane Byrne, who was the wife of Governor Brendan Byrne, was here at the Center on the American Governor to film an interview. That interview begins now. Okay. Well, Jeane Byrne, thank you so much for coming to Eagleton to talk with us.
You're welcome.
You grew up in West Orange, New Jersey?
I did.
And you were a school teacher?
I was.
At what age or subject?
I taught first and second graders. And I had, as part of my student teaching, I was a graduate student at NYU at the time, so I did 2 months in Harlem and 2 months at the Walden School, which was a very progressive private school. And I thought to myself, how is this going to prepare me to teach in the public school system? But I managed. Yeah.
And your graduate program was in education? And then you got married in 1953, I think?
53, yeah.
So, and did you and Brendan meet in West Orange, or how did that happen?
Yeah, I was friendly with his younger sister, and they were a fairly prominent family in West Orange, and that his father was a commissioner, public safety commissioner. So, yeah, I didn't really know him, but I knew who he was, and we started dating, I guess, in 1951 after he was out of law school for a year or two.
And was there politics in your family growing up, or
not a bit? Not a bit.
You know? And it wasn't something you were thinking about particularly when you were
I have to admit, and he said, that is, Brendan said it could have ruined his career, but at one point I was vice chairman of the Young Republican Club of West Orange.
So you did care about politics.
So, anyway.
Pre-marriage?
But I went back to the Democratic fold later.
So when Brendan ran for governor, it was 20 years after you'd been married, I think.
Yes.
Right? And it was the first office he ran for. Did you see that coming? Did you think when you got married that you were marrying a politician?
No, I did not. I was a teacher, he was a lawyer, so I thought that's the way it was going to go. And I think, I don't know what was inside his head, but he clerked at a law firm in Newark, and the name of the law firm was McGlynn, Weintraub, and Stein. And of course the Weintraub was Joe Weintraub, who left the firm to go down to be chief counsel for Governor Robert B. Minor. And so Joe Weintraub got Brendan to go down and work as, in counsel's office. And then he ultimately became Minor's chief of staff. And it just went on from there. And I suppose you know all this, but then it was Essex County prosecutor after that. And then from there, he left 1 year short of his second term, so he was there for 9 years, and then became head of the Public Utility Commission. And then Governor Cahill appointed him to the bench. And shortly after he was appointed, he became the assignment judge and sat up in Morris County. So that all was leading up. Now, did I see something coming? Well, maybe I was pushing it out of my head because I didn't want to see it. But I would go to the local grocery store, and they'd say, Mrs. Byrne, your husband's going to be governor someday. I go down to the Texaco gas station, Mrs. Byrne.
This was like 1972 or well before that,
yeah,
earlier than
maybe
that?
71, 72, maybe even before that, maybe 70, 69. But I'm saying no. I don't want to hear that. But I must say, even my mother was rather prescient that way, and she said, she could see it as a possibility, but unfortunately she didn't live long enough to see him.
But she saw that when you got married or later?
I don't know, but at one point she said,
That's interesting. So what was that like for you? When was there, did he just announce he was doing it, or did you...
I was aware that when he was still on the bench, people were calling him and writing him letters and contacting him, urging him to run for governor. And he said no. And first of all, he was a judge, and they cannot get involved in politics. So it died down for a while and then started up again. And this time he started taking it seriously. And of course, long story short, he resigned from the bench and started, but had to get certain things in place, you know. So you just get a feel for, you know, what kind of support is out there. But so he just said, one day he said, "I'm going to do it." Okay.
My impression is, I mean, I guess there were others, but Ken McPherson was a major presence at that
yes,
point.
Yes, and he was a neat guy. I liked him a lot, and his wife as well, Sheila. And then there was Don Lan, who was constantly on the phone with him, and there were some good people. You know, that Alan Sagner was another. But I mean, these were all people I didn't know. I got to know them, but they were total strangers to me. And it was interesting too, because my two oldest sons were elected boy state governors. Tom in 1972, I believe, 71, junior year, 71. And then my son Timothy, when we lived down here, he was elected also. But I remember Tom saying, "Okay, now Dad, you got to go for the real thing."
So at that point, had you stopped teaching?
Oh, I had stopped a long time ago. First of all,
7 kids?
This was back in the dark ages when you were pregnant, when you reached 4 months of pregnancy, you were asked very politely to leave. That was the rule. You could not teach beyond that time. And of course, we had 7 kids, so when I was certainly not going to go back to teaching.
So once Brendan was running in 73, did your life change immediately?
Pretty much immediately. And I remember people calling, wanted to interview me, and I remember the very first one, I really blew it. A woman from the Philadelphia paper, the Inquirer maybe, made an appointment with her. Totally forgot about it. Went off to my paddle game that morning. Came home, there was a note on my door. I thought, oh my God, what a way to start. So I called the woman. She was very, very nice, and we rescheduled it. And from then on, things went quite smoothly. But I do remember my son Bill was all of 3 years old at the time, and when people kept coming to the house, and of course the cute little blonde curly hair, wanted to take his picture, and Barbara's also, got to the point where he'd run behind a chair and hide, you know. So, your life is...
Were you interviewed a fair... I mean, I don't know if first ladies were interviewed as much then as they are now, or potential first ladies. Were you sought out by the press?
It was quite busy, I would say, and once we got down to Morvan, it was very busy. As a matter of fact, Barbara Kukla, who had been with the Star Ledger, and I got to like her a whole lot. And she would come and interview. She would go shopping with me at the A&P. Well, she actually came and rode to Princeton with us on our moving day.
And then wrote about it?
And, I'm sorry?
And then wrote about it?
But she was right with us on moving day. I'm thinking, this is really... a bit much, but I liked her. She was fun. She was pleasant, and I trusted her. That was another thing Brendan had said: be very, very careful what you say in front of reporters, because they're not your best friend.
Yeah. Did other people in the campaign try to script what you would say at all, or give you advice, or was it just Brendan who?
Well, he didn't really give me advice, but he did give me that tip.
Yeah.
Having been the prosecutor's office for so many years, and you have to get along with the press. But you know, so he was an old pro at it. So that was just one little tip. And I mean, I'm sure he he wanted me to be very careful because you know, what I could say, what I said might reflect on him. You know, you're always thinking about not just what you say, or how it affects you, but how it affects somebody else. So there's always that person next to you that you have to think about too.
So he won. Was there any question that you would move to Morvan, or just?
There was no question. I had nothing to do with it. And I was just thinking about that the other day because how things have changed. I mean, New Jersey didn't have a governor's home until the 50s. Bob Miner was the first one to live at Morvan, and that was 1957, I believe.
And then you lived in Morvan, and
we lived there for 8 years.
And Governor Kane stayed at his house.
Kane stayed put, and Christie stayed put, and Corzine really he stayed at Drumthwacket sometimes, but he also
really
had
the Florios who were real presences at Drumthwacket.
And of course, McGreevy's lived there, and Florios.
So was Morvan, there was some way in which Morvan, I gather, was sort of inadequate to the function that caused the move to Drumthwacket? Was it not a good place to live?
First of all, it irritated me that people would refer to it as a mansion. It was not. But that's just how it goes. They want to call it a mansion because I guess to a lot of people. To me, it was just a big old drafty, inconvenient house. And we had built our house. It wasn't palatial, but it accommodated our family very nicely.
Your house in West Orange?
Had a nice recreation room we put in on the lower level, and Morvan didn't offer that. And, you know, I had little kids. And there was no playroom, though. So we kind of hung out in the solarium. And even sometimes people would, and I'd close the door. Let that be, if there are other people in the house, close the door, don't open it unless you knock. I'd have some people that would be in there and they just come open the door, walk through out to the back, you know, if the meeting was going on. And I think, you know, it's
your home.
Not a proper way to behave. And anyway,
so you
lack of privacy.
So was that the way your life felt in general? Sort of invaded?
Sure.
So you moved in January, I guess? Or?
Brendan moved in January, and I moved down in March. I had to get the kids all settled in school, and you know.
So they all switched schools in mid-year, or March?
So I had they arranged. Tom at that time was finishing his sophomore year at Princeton University. And I had them all the way down to Bill, who was preschool. So, so I had preschool, elementary, middle school, high school, and college. So I had to get all those who were in the public school system settled.
And they all went to public school at that point?
Yep.
So, looking back, the Byrne administration is seen as one that was very active and had a lot of major accomplishments and a lot of controversy. How did you experience it? Were you involved in discussions?
I was not really, no. Brendan didn't work that way. He had very good, accomplished staff people, and that was his family, you know, outside of the home. And the only, I think, two things that he asked me to do. One was there was a committee formed on studying the county college system. And he asked if I would be willing to serve on that, with that group, which I did. And I'm not sure, that may have lasted for maybe 6 months or so. And the other thing that he asked me about, and I think it was just, he had made up his mind, when he appointed John Degnan
as Attorney General,
he said, "What do you think?" and I loved John, but he was only 32 years old. But Brendan was only 34 years old when he became prosecutor, so, you know, it didn't seem outlandish to me. And John has, so those are the only two things I feel that, you know, other than that.
So when Brendan decided to run for a second term, was that, did you think that was inevitable, or was there really a decision being made there, or a question?
We did talk about that, and but I think I felt at the time things were looking more encouraging as time went by, and I thought, you know, I wasn't crazy about hanging around there for another 4 years, but I also didn't think it was fair not to give it a shot. You know, that he had a very productive 4 years, and I thought he should remain there. And I remember also when he was on what do they call it, a business mission, a trade mission to Japan. There happened to be, on a Sunday, a very, I thought, quite unkind, rather nasty editorial in the Trenton Times urging the governor not to run again. And it was written by one Herb Wolf, who had been Brendan's press secretary. And then he went to work at the Trenton Times as editor. And I thought, you know, this is really nasty, and it just got me. So I got out my yellow legal pad, and I wrote a letter to the editor. And I went, some people don't like him because he rocks the boat. He tells the truth. Too many of these legislators and are concerned about getting reelected, and they're not doing what they should do. And of course, this was when the income tax was the big subject. So, so I wrote a letter to the editor, and they published it. And there were some people who said, you know, they thought that kind of changed the tide. You know, First Lady speaks out, and I thought, nah. But I mean, I was irked, and I just didn't like the nastiness, the tone of it, and So
that was did you do any other things like that, or that was a one?
Well, I did all my own speech writing. I did not let anybody write a speech for me because I didn't feel comfortable with other people's words. And I can remember, you know, I wanted to get the wording just right, and sometimes at 2 o'clock in the morning, you know, it would come to me, and I'd write it down on a piece of paper so I wouldn't forget it, or a phrase would come to me. And then another interesting thing I did toward the end was I was asked to take part in I don't know whether you'd call it a symposium, I guess, at Seton Hall, and they, at the School of Nursing, and they asked me, they were doing women in politics, women in the workplace, women in healthcare, women in blah. They asked me if I could do that, and I had a wonderful time. I wrote my own speech for that, and I was, you know, it went over very well, and I became very good friends with the then dean of the School of Nursing. She has since gone on to other things, but we make sure we still get together, you know, every year. She is just a wonderful, wonderful woman, and she just retired. She left Seton Hall to go up and work at the University of Massachusetts. They made her a chancellor or something, and then she came back. She was there for a few years and came back and worked in several hospitals. And she also has been teaching at Columbia University and NYU, postdoctoral students. I mean, she's a real whiz, but that, you know, that was another part.
Who was that? What's her name?
Kathy Derschel, Dr. Derschel.
So when you would write these speeches or go out or write a letter to the Trenton Times, you wrote it yourself. Did anybody see it before you did it, or you didn't clear it with Brendan or someone in the campaign?
No.
Yeah.
Guess they didn't care. But I mean, it was the second time around. Of course, everybody was 4 years older, so it was a little easier for me to take off. And so, I mean, I did anything from small house parties to I remember speaking to a bunch of women up in Chatham Township. They want to know what the governor likes to have for dinner. What do you do for fun, or they just want to know how you live. And I said, we live like everybody else pretty much, except for the fact.
And how did Brendan and relating to the children work? I mean, was he out of the house a lot? Did you carve out weekends or sometimes, or was it just
It got to the point where he was out pretty much every night of the week. Sometimes he'd come home for dinner and then out again to make the rounds.
When
I would say, just to enlarge on that a bit, there was not a lot of help at Morvan. We had two women come in part of the day. One would come in a little bit later and stay later. The other one came in at 6 o'clock, and they'd alternate those hours. But on Sunday, just one came in. She'd make Brendan's tea and get him his cereal and all this kind of stuff. And I said, and go home, I want to cook. I'm doing the cooking on Sunday. I don't want anybody, waiting on us.
Did you have, in those days, were there state police assigned to the house all the time?
Yes, there were two. As a matter of fact, when we moved down, the state police were using the kitchen, and I'm thinking, how is this going to work? So finally, I spoke up and tried to be diplomatic. I said, can I have the kitchen to myself? And not having to be sharing pots and pans, and I felt as though I had to sign in. This is my time. So we got that straightened out, and the state police had a room off the kitchen where they could sit and watch TV, and then they had like a hot plate or stuff like that. But
had the Cahills been living in Morvan right before you, Governor Cahill?
Yeah.
Did they give you any advice or welcome you?
We had dinner with the Cahills one evening, and with another couple from Jack McCarthy, who had been a friend of many governors, and he and his wife Kathy, with whom we became very friendly. But Jack was another one of the early supporters, trying to get Brendan to run. So we had just the three couples, Cahills, McCarthys, and the Byrnes. Well, good Irish names. But and so they kind of gave us a introduction to what. But I did not sit down and talk with Betty Cahill a lot. I got a lot of. I knew Helen Minor pretty well. In fact, I used to campaign with her. And
when she was running for
when she was
Congress?
running for Congress, yeah. And she was fun. But so, I got more from, and even Betty Hughes. I got to know Betty Hughes quite well. And she gave me, she helped me out, pointers and stuff.
We were talking just before we started filming, I was showing you the picture of Eleanor Roosevelt, and you were talking about having met her. Were there other moments like that stand out from those years of people you got to meet or host?
Well, we spent quite a few, went to the White House quite a few times, and that was mainly because the governor's winter conference was in Washington in the winter, and typically I think it was in February. So the White House, the president then would have all the governors and their wives for dinner at the White House at the end of the conference. And so we got to meet quite a few.
So that was Nixon, Ford, and Carter, I guess, right? Those years.
And Nixon, Ford. Carter and Bill Clinton, we got to know because he had been governor, so we used to see them.
Did you host gatherings here, or go to? Did you travel much for events or out of the state?
No, not a lot, because then. Well, it was a matter of money. The only thing where my expenses were covered was to the governor's conferences. Other than that, if I were to accompany him, we'd have to pay our own way. And of course, there was not a lot of money there, never had been, and had kids in college. Paying 3 tuitions at a time? I don't think so.
Yeah. I mean, you, I guess we're getting a free house in those years, but a lower salary, is that right?
Yeah, but we still had our house up in, in West Orange, and Brendan offered it to one of his former law partners, and we did not change. He said, we're not going to charge rent, but we'll let them pay our mortgage payments, if that, you know. So that's the way we handled that. And then I did, when I wanted to keep the house just in case, but we did sell it after he was reelected.
And were there events hosted in New Jersey, either at Morvan or other places, that you would, you know, from people visiting from other countries or other states? Or?
A lot of groups, for instance, the Historical Society would always have their annual event at Morvan. We had a lot going on, and and of course it was at their expense. You know, we would make the arrangements, get the caterer, get the tents put up, because Morvan, you know, couldn't hold that many people. So. So yeah, we did. There were a lot of groups, you know, but they were a major thing. And then of course we always hosted the Supreme Court. But there
that was a dinner.
And then we had senior art shows, senior citizen during the day. We had 6 weeks after I arrived, I think we had Easter seals coming. This was a daytime thing, and I remember my daughter Barbara in first grade, and she comes in the house, and there are all these people in the center hall. Mommy, where's Mommy?
When you say you hosted the Supreme Court, would they come? Was that a dinner or?
Yeah, it was a dinner.
An annual thing.
Yes, that was an annual thing. Yeah, but there were all kinds of, and then I think Brendan started this kind of arts things where we would, and that would be pretty much. I think that was on a Sunday afternoon, and we'd have people from different sectors of the art world. Honored, you know. One of whom was Madame Maria Juritza, who sang at the Met, and we got to know Maria quite well. And I think she felt it was a little beneath her status too. You know, she was kind of above all that. But she was then in her 90s, and amazing. Yeah, I think she died when she was just short of her 105th birthday. And we used to go to the opera with her usually every other Saturday.
In New York?
At the Met. And people would recognize her. She'd wear a big hat. And we'd usually sit up in the third row.
And when you went to New York, did people recognize Brendan?
Well, he wasn't that recognizable yet. Because this was before he was elected governor, just before. But yeah, that was something. Sometimes when we'd be in New York, you know, we'd go to Brooks Brothers, and of course he'd walk in, oh, governor, you know. And I remember one time we were walking along the street, and these 2 gentlemen passed us by going the other way, and you could hear them say, "That's Brendan Byrne." And he goes, nudges me in the ribs and smiles, you know. They know who I am. Oh, gosh.
So when you look now, you know, several decades later at the roles of first ladies and governors or presidents, or the role of John Whitman as a first husband, do you have thoughts about that, of what that must be like for them?
Well,
or could have been different for you?
Then, as with the wives of presidents, it was always, what is your thing going to be, your focus, or your whatever you want to call it. And I think to myself, I got 7 kids. What do you think? Yeah. But, you know, I said, well, my background is education. One of our children was severely, profoundly, I should say, retarded, and I know that's a word we're not supposed to use anymore, but I don't have a problem with it. to me if it's a perfectly good word. And so I was, that certainly was an interest of mine. The
policies for people with disabilities?
Yeah. And our daughter had Down syndrome. And so that was a concern and an interest, of course, and education in general. And I remember a group of teachers came down. I don't know what they were protesting, but it was a Saturday morning, and they came down and they were outside the fence of Morvan, standing on the sidewalk, and Brendan said, "You were a teacher, why don't you go out and talk to them?" So out I went. And I was rather shocked because they kind of looked grungy to me. I think it was when the dress code was starting to change, and a lot of these people were in kind of dungarees. But anyway, I spoke to them, and I don't know what I said, don't ask me. But
was that a rare occurrence that people would come demonstrate at Morvan?
It didn't happen all that often, and they were very nice. And then on a few occasions, I did go down and talk to the Congress or the NJE when they'd have their meetings in Trenton, and that I enjoyed, because I related. But I remember we had when we were having the oil shortage, and so we decided everybody should have no higher than 68 in the
temperature
during and at night it goes down to 62. Well, I had a couple of people come to the front door, and they wanted to check the Morvan thermostat. And I thought, well, that's rather bold.
Yeah.
But they came in and they looked at the thermostat. Okay. I mean, first of all, the heating system in that house was so unstable, you couldn't tell whether it was 62 or 68 or what. But anyway, yeah, people are funny.
Were policies for your daughter with Down syndrome, was the government helpful to you at all at that point? Or it was just before, it was before there was much of a movement?
No. The truth is that I was paying more for Marianne's tuition, than I was paying for my son at Princeton University.
And where was she going?
The first 2 years of her life, she was in a private hospital in Amityville, Long Island. And then she moved to Totowa, and then after a certain age, then she moved down to Hunterdon State School, which I was very impressed with. We went down on a regular basis, piled all the kids in a station wagon, and went down to visit her. And they were very good. And she is presently living in South Plainfield, in what they call the Keystone School, or Keystone Homes. And their original school or home was in Scranton, Pennsylvania. Then the director opened the school or home in Plainfield, and that's where she resides presently.
Okay. And you all fit in a station wagon? Is there 8 of you?
Well, whatever. Yeah. Maybe not the whole family on every trip. Some were away at school. But we'd go down on a regular basis. And
well, I really appreciate your talk. Is there anything else you'd like to add, or?
No, I think Faribor's might have a few things he wants to add to his.
Okay, well, Faribor's the team. He has been in the written text he's provided for this archive. He's talked about how effective you were with talking to groups and.
Well, I like the small groups because, as I say, I didn't mind the large groups, but I do remember the first campaign. There was something going on a Saturday afternoon in Middlesex County at the county college, and my hands were shaking, my knees were knocking, and then I'm sitting there and I'm listening to a couple of women who were sort of leaders in the Democratic Party locally in their county, and I'm thinking to myself, Jeane, you are a grown woman. You're as smart as they are. You can do it. If they can do it, you can do it. And I had taken a speaking course when I was an undergraduate at Bucknell. And that kind of, when you had to get up in front of a class, and I remember a friend of mine just went cold. She went blank and had to sit down. I got through my speech, so I mean that helped. I knew I could, but you kind of have to learn all over again. But it was amazing how quickly I became comfortable with it, and especially since I was doing my own writing, that helped. And I always had 3x5 cards.
So you had them in front of you when you gave a speech?
Most of the time.
Yeah. And are there particular accomplishments of the 8 years that you feel particularly proud of, or think were the major accomplishments of Brendan?
Well, he will say himself that it was the Pinelands, and I would agree with that. And it saddens me because they keep eating away at that area, and you wonder how long it's going to last. And then I see, how can they do this when this preservation was put in order? I don't know what in what context, a law, or
state law and federal law.
Yeah. How can they keep nibbling away and building? It's a treasure.
Were you when at least the folklore and I think what Brendan says of his interest in the Pinelands came from partly or largely from John McPhee and his book.
Yes,
were you friends?
Indeed.
Were you in the McPhee's?
We got to know the McPhees fairly well. Yes, he had read McPhee's book, and that's what sparked set this thing off.
And they were tennis partners, I gather.
Yeah, they played tennis. Yeah, well, Brendan had a lot of tennis partners. Peter Benchley, for one, because they lived across the street, sort of from the Morvan tennis court. And, but that sparked it. And you can understand the anger and the fight back from the people that had bought, acres and acres and acres and acres for the cranberries and blueberries, whatever,
Yeah.
But you have to look at the greater good,